Hey, it's Christina from Proverbs 31 Homestead. Today I'm going to show you how to kill two birds with one stone by making plum applesauce. This time of year I have a lot of beautiful red plums plus a lot of apples, and this recipe really makes my job easier by combining the two, so I only have to preserve them all at once. But some of you may say, hey Christina, I thought you only did tested safe recipes for canning. That's true. So don't panic if you don't recognize this recipe. I'm going to show you at the end of the video why it's safe to can. You might also be interested to know that I am using 4-jar lids for the first time in this video. We'll see how it goes. To begin making your plum applesauce, you need 5 pounds of freshly washed plums. My plums are these beautiful red-skinned and red-fleshed plums that are sweet tart, heavier on the tart than sweetness. I wish I knew the variety, but unfortunately I don't. This tree was well established when we moved here and unmarked. After you wash them, you'll notice that all plums have this little seam. As kids, maybe you called it a butt crack. I just cut down that seam and all the way around the plum, pop it apart, and then the pit comes out very easily. If you happen to have plums that cling to the pit, the best way to pit them, the fastest and easiest way, is to take a whole plum like this and then get one of those apple cores that is a tube, and you center it over the stem area, push down, and it will push the pit out. It will also take a little bit of the flesh, but not much, and it is by far the fastest and easiest way to pit a plum that clings to the pit. Next, you need 5 pounds of apples. And by the way, when I say 5 pounds, I am talking about weighing while the apple or the plum is whole before you cut it, before you core it or pit it. These apples, I wish I knew the variety again, but all of our apple trees were well established before we moved here. It is a sweeter apple, I would say, to pair with the rather tart plums. So keep that in mind when you are choosing your fruit. You probably don't want both the plum and the apples to be sweet, or the end result I would think would be very sickening sweet. So try to balance tart with sweet. This is a great use for small apples that you just aren't sure what else to do with. Another good thing to do with these is to juice them. I have once in a great while run across an apple that is sort of bumpy or pulpy when I make applesauce. So you might want to cook down some apples first and kind of see how they turn out when they puree before you make applesauce. With these, I am just going to use a knife to cut in half. This is probably too small of a knife. And then I cut into quarters, and notice how I'm cutting to one side of that core. And then I'm going to turn it around and cut this core off. Sorry, I'm right-handed, got to do it this way. Okay, now I have removed the core with a minimum number of cuts. I'm going to do that for all my apples. You might wonder if you need to peel your apples. You can. I choose not to, and I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end of the video when I talk about why this recipe is a safe one. Now you just put your apples in a big pot, followed by the plums. I like to put the apples first because they take a little longer to cook down and we don't want anything to scorch. And we're going to add 3 cups of water. And turn on the heat. I recommend kind of a medium setting because, again, you don't want to have anything get scorched. We want to cook until the apples are soft and very tender. Let's check on the apples and plums. The plums are definitely cooking down nicely. The apples are starting to soften, but they're still a little too tough to puree, so keep stirring periodically so that nothing scorches. And in the meantime, over here, I have my jars sitting in a pot of hot water. It's very important to use hot jars. Fill them with hot food Not only is that about jar safety, you don't want the jars to experience thermal shock and break, but it's about keeping the food at a high enough temperature that the processing time continues to be accurate. So the whole point of processing food in a canner is to heat that food to kill off any harmful microorganisms, while the center of the jar takes the longest to heat. And just making sure hot food, hot jars, that's going to bring the food up to temperature faster and ensure that all those bad things that can make your food go off in the pantry or potentially make you sick are gone. Also, I have a pot of water I'm starting to warm over here for the 4-jar lids, because like the old school ball lids, these 4-jar lids are supposed to be simmered before you use them. Don't boil them. Boil them can make this compound that seals to the jar grow too thin for a good seal. You just want to simmer them gently. You're softening that compound. This is going to be interesting because the modern Ball and Kerr and Bernardin lids all tell you not to simmer the lids anymore because the compound they use is now different. And so I got rid of my little magnetic wand that I used to use to lift lids out of the simmering water. So I'll have to use tongs or something today. It's going to be interesting. But if I like these lids, I will happily reinvest in a little magnetic wand. I think they're $2 or $3 tops, not a big deal. As it turns out, I have only one outlet in this little dark canning kitchen, and so I cannot have my immersion blender plugged in and my light plugged in, which will help you see what I'm doing. So I have already used my immersion blender here to puree this plum applesauce. Now, if you don't have an immersion blender, I really highly recommend it. It is so handy for many things, but it just makes the job of making applesauce 1,000 times easier. You can use a food mill, a manual food mill, or possibly an electric one. I have done that. I have it as a backup, but I run a busy homestead, and doing it manually takes so much more time and effort. A immersion blender, it's done in like a minute or less. So I've got it all nicely blended, and now I'm just going to add a few added ingredients. Most of these are optional. I'll talk about it as I walk through it. First, I'm going to add 8 tablespoons of bottled lemon juice. If you hate bottled lemon juice, I highly recommend that you just try a few different brands. Some are definitely better than others, and we all have different taste buds. This used to be an optional ingredient that I just feel it pumps up the flavor, but Ball recently did research, new testing on apple products, home canned apple products, and found that apples are not really that consistent or as consistent as they thought in pH. And the longer the apples or the apple product sits, the more that acidity can drop. So 8 tablespoons. Next is cinnamon, ground cinnamon. This is definitely optional. However, I really love the way it tastes in any type of applesauce. And I feel that for this sweet tart plum applesauce, it just ups the flavor tremendously. Next is a 1/2 cup of granulated sugar. I use cane sugar only. Other types of sugar can be bioengineered. This is definitely an optional ingredient, so I really encourage you to taste the applesauce before you add sugar. Maybe you won't need to add sugar. Maybe you could add less sugar. Sugar in this recipe is strictly for flavor. You can omit it completely safely. Now I have to use the immersion blender to just add in those ingredients. You could also just stir it in. Now we're ready to start canning. I just wanted to mention too that I have these funnels from 4 jars, and they seem really high quality stainless steel. I am really pleased with these. I have been looking for funnels that would last forever, and I think this might be it. They come in the regular mouth, which is this, and a wide mouth, and then they also come with this handy dandy little strainer, so I'm recommending those at this point. We are going to use a 1/2 inch headspace. So make sure that your applesauce is still hot. I have my lid simmering. Look at that color. Those red plums just make it so pretty. This is one of my favorite products too. I'll have to link to it in the description. I can't remember the brand, but it just holds a really nice amount of liquid, or in this case applesauce. And it can hook onto the pot like that. So you need to debubble just by running a plastic, I just use the handle of this scooper on there. It's important to get that rim nice and clean, so have a damp towel ready. You can use a paper towel, that's fine. Just kind of check your 1/2 inch headspace there, that's looking good. Grab your lid, center it up on the jar. These happen to be 4-jar canning rings too. And they look, I don't know, somehow the material seems slightly different than some of the ones that I have had before. Just till you get resistance, and then a wrist turn more. And then into the canner. Remember how we were talking about having the jars and the food nice and hot when they go into the canner? For that reason, you don't want to stage jars, which means, you know, lining your jars up on the counter, filling each jar up with food, and then putting them back in the canner. That just lets things cool down a little bit, so it's not recommended. Instead, just fill 1 jar at a time. Take a jar out of the canner, empty the water back into the canner or into the sink if you need to. Fill the jar with hot food, put the lid on, and then it goes back into the canner of hot water. Kind of a best practices kind of thing. I overfilled that a little. Bubbling. Wiping the rim. This is also a really good time if you feel any like imperfections on that rim as you wipe it. That is not a jar you want to use for canning because the lid won't seal. All my applesauce is now in jars in the canner. I got 5 quart jars out of this batch. Often I get 6, but it just varies according to the apples or the plums that you're using. Some of them have more liquid. Maybe I cooked this a little bit more longer. No worries. I'm going to go ahead and put the lid on this and process the jars. And while I'm doing that, I'm going to work on a second batch of plum applesauce. So once this water comes to a full rolling boil, I'm going to process these jars for 20 minutes. That is either quarts or pints, 20 minutes in a water bath canner. Once 20 minutes are up, turn off the heat and remove the lid and let the jars sit in the hot water for another 5 minutes. After 5 minutes, you can one by one remove the jars. Make sure when you're removing them, you keep them upright. Don't worry about the little bit of water that is on top of the lid. And here they are, all beautifully sealed.
So pretty and so delicious.
First, I want to note that all the 4-jar lids sealed. Every lid that I used sealed, but I was very pleased with the performance of these and I will definitely be using them again. Now let's talk a little bit about why this recipe is safe. So first, I want to talk about the fact that I'm combining 2 fruits into a sauce. If you go to the National Center for Home Food Preservation website, and they are considered the gold standard when it comes to safety in home canning, and you look under their canning tab, and then under fruits, you will see a listing for fruit purees. And there it will show you that almost all fruits, there are a few exceptions, can be cooked down, pureed, and canned. Basically applesauce, but with different types of fruits. Plums and apples are definitely in that category. That is why I can combine plums and apples to make this plum applesauce. So you definitely can look at their list of safe fruits to do this with and make combinations of your own. Then I want to talk about the fact that I don't peel my apples for applesauce. This is pretty controversial, I will admit. And that is because almost all recipes that are modern and tested safe call for peeling apples. In canning, most fruits are peeled, and the reason for this is sort of twofold. One, when the testing was done originally, the people doing the testing were assuming that we wouldn't want bits of peel floating around in our jars, so they tested without the peel. But secondly, the peels of fruits carry a higher bacterial load than the rest of the fruit. So this is why normally you will be told, always peel your fruit, because otherwise you're increasing the bacterial load and the processing time wasn't developed for that additional bacterial load, okay? But as with most rules in canning, home canning, commercial canning, there are exceptions. The biggest exception is if the recipe says you don't have to peel it, you don't. Because that recipe was tested with unpeeled fruit and the processing time reflects that higher bacterial load, maybe thicker density and things like that. So where did I find an applesauce recipe that didn't call for peeling the apples? The answer is Ball. Ball has published recipes where you do not need to peel the apples, and I believe it was last year, I wrote to them specifically questioning them about this because I just wanted to make doubly sure that I was understanding their recipes correctly. And they told me peeling is optional. You will also find that certain recipes for applesauce call for putting the food through a food mill without peeling the apples first. Okay, this tells us that this is not a bacterial load issue, because once you have the peels in your cooked apples and then you run them through your mill, you're exposing your applesauce to that bacteria that was on the skin. So I use the processing time that Ball gave, 20 minutes, for my unpeeled applesauce, and in this case, my plum applesauce, where the apples are not peeled. It is totally normal not to peel plums for canning. You can, but the recipes were developed with the skins on the fruit in mind because plums are a pain to peel. So there you go. I hope that you will like this video, share it, subscribe, but also check out my blog and check me out on Facebook. I have tons of homesteading information, including canning information, on all those sources. See you next time.